Okay, so I'm going to do a quick tutorial on doing your Chrome object. Once again, we're going to start with a clear blender. The aim, of course, here, some of you may have already done your first Chrome object. I know a couple have. But even if you have, I wanted to demonstrate this. Generally what I do, starting with the lightest tones in my render, I'm going to put a stroke of clear blender on, but not across that line that I have to indicate the horizon line. And I also like to try avoid smearing my graphite. So what I'm going to do there is put a stroke along the graphite and then fill in between. And a nice little trick about that is that once you put a stroke of marker on your graphite, it tends to seal it in a little bit so you get less smudging like that. So I'm just going to go along, lift my paper to see how I'm doing, and you can see I still have not really filled this area with blender. Better. Okay, so now I'm going to deal with the top half first. And that means 10, 20, and 30%. Just like with the top side of your cube, you're going to start with 10, work your way to 20, and then 30. So I have two 20s here, and I'm looking for my 10. Let's see here. There we go. And I'm just going to check that. Yep. Okay, so when I lay the 10 down, I'm actually going to start at the top, just like I did on those geometric shapes. Start with what will be the darkest zone in the upper half of your render. And again, the advantage of pre-wetting this area with Blender is that I don't have any strokes. You kind of notice that. It should look about like that. So no individual stroke showing it. And I'd really like the blend right down to the pencil line to be nice and clean. Even had a little bit of an extra line. I moved my pencil line a little bit. I'm going to render that in just ever so lightly. And now it's time for step 2, which is to go to 20. And again, I started at the top side. And then I'm going to switch back up to my blender. Actually, that's a 10, which is fine. Always got to check. And I'll just kind of go down to the middle of this top half of the section and test, and that's actually looking pretty decent. And last but not least, 30. See, you see now there is a similarity in procedure process for doing a light or bright object. A non-reflective cube, start with your lightest tone. Use Blender first. I usually start with the lighter sides and create what I would call a ghost image. I do not start with the darkest side. And the reason is it's hard to judge whether I've got it too dark, not dark enough, before I have these lighter tones in. And then I work kind of globally on the whole piece. So right there I'm going to stop. And now here's the difference. I'm going to do the bottom side. So we have two zones. We have the sky reflective zone, I call it, then the ground reflective zone with a line delineating between the two. That's the big difference between a reflective object and a non-reflective. I wrote down 30% here. I could even start with 40, like that, and I think I will change my mind a little bit here, and I'm going to put a stroke of 40 right up against the bottom side of that horizon line. And that's literally what we're looking at here. Outline the entire object and then fill. It's the quickest way to block your tone in and what we want always is that nice smooth tone. There are some exceptions as we get into rendering fur and things like that. And you can see I'm leaving my marker right on the paper like that. Short strokes, not a lot of pressure. And while the paper's wet, I'm just going to fill that entire area. And even here at this early stage, you can kind of see the idea that this is going to become a reflective object. So, next step will be 50. And that, I may even jump to 70 here, use the fine tip on the edge just so I can see that extreme dark tone starting. And once again, the darkest dark goes up against the lightest light. This is a very simple object. Just one reflection, one shape. And the idea is it's like almost like a droplet of water, except it's metallic, so it has depth. And that's why you're seeing the curvature of the horizon line on the edges. That was my way of saying, yeah, this isn't just a flat mirror. It's actually a dimensional kind of droplet of water shaped object. It has depth to it. So you can see right away, I'm going to go into that 70. I'm using a 30 here. And I'm going to soften that edge. And my goal here is to create a really nice smooth transition. You can see where the importance of doing those gradations comes in now. Here we are on our first actual object that is a texture. And we're actually trying to create a nice smooth gradation on it. Softening that edge with a 60. It's a bridge between the 40 and the 70. And you can see I'm actually doing a little cross hatching here to get that to blend. Then I'm going to go right back up into the 70. And you can see I'm getting that extreme contrast. That's what I'm going for. I would like to actually prevent that edge from forming in the lower ground reflection. You can kind of see this happening here. So I'm actually taking a 20. Deal with that right now. Wet into wet. So if you see something developing, you don't like it, deal with it before that area is dried. Now, let's go to 50. Just make that transition a bit more gradual. Because the paper's wet, these strokes just kind of blend right in. I'm letting the paper do the work for me, and ideally that's what I want to do. Now, last but not least, we're going to go to 80. Which gives us a 90 because we've got layered tones under there. We've got a 40, a 70, and now an 80. And that really gets us to 90, even 95. You can see there's that kind of glowing effect. So the idea is this would be like a sunset. Right after sunset, this is the glow of the sun, light coming over the horizon, and then the sky gets darker, and the ground is a darker tone. It gets lighter as they get towards you to emphasize contrast. Now for my shadow, solid object. So unlike a glass object, which I will show next, I don't need to show a lot of light getting inside that shadow area. I'm starting with a 50, by the way. I do tend to put the shadow tone right up against the object first, and then actually take this is, by the way, the lightest tone that I will have in the shadow. It's a 50. And I'm just going to pull that shape around and then fill. And you can see the beginning of my reflective light coming here into the picture at the bottom, like that. It's pretty decent rendered so far. Now, darken it right up against the object. It's really my discretion how dark I want this shadow to be. I haven't really defined what the texture is that this object is sitting on. If I was going to do a wood desk, I would determine what the base color or tone is of that wood material. That would be my first tone. I'd actually do a blend, a gradation, and then I would have my wood texture sliding underneath or slipping underneath the object. So I'm going to push the drama again. Actually going into this with an 80. You notice I, again, put the darkest tone right up against the object and then feather it out with a lighter tone while it's still wet. And you can see I've lifted the back side of that object up off the surface a bit, but I want to do more. So here we introduce pencil a little bit. So I have a white Prismacolor pencil, which you see there. It's the Premier brand. There are several different major types of colored pencil. There's the Verithin. Don't use that because it's not it's transparent. It will not lay an opaque tone over like I'm doing here, and you'll spend forever trying to actually do what I'm doing right here, which is building a little bit of extra light. You can see this is almost like putting pastel over the top of a painted surface. It's not fully opaque, but it's pretty darn close to. It's wax-based, and because it's wax-based, it means that permanent markers, which are based in alcohol, will actually dissolve and liquefy the pencil. Now, if you watch what I'm doing here, I'm just taking that white with a blender, and I'm going to liquefy and blend it gently, using some pressure. You can kind of hear my marker, to push that in to that layer of 40% I had at the bottom. And you can see I get this kind of dramatic counterbalancing light reflecting back in. And the nice thing about this too is that white pencil, say, I can do little touch-ups. I have a little bit of a gritty edge there. If I want to fix that, I can go and do that. I can also clean up edges on the outside of the object. I could even put a little rim of reflected light on the edge of the object too, and start building an even more complex secondary reflection going around the edge of the object. Doing that, just remember, you can layer. So having put the pencil down, I can now go in with, and this is, just I always like to tell you what I'm using, 20% marker. And I'll show you something. Where I put the pencil down, it stays light, but you notice where I put marker onto the paper where I didn't put colored pencil, it gets darker, which is a nice little trick. If you know that's going to happen, I can create a little extra soft reflection, and then I'm going to blend it. Like that. And that, in a nutshell, I've just used the tones that you see that I've written down. These tones right here, and that's just a quick example of how to render the chrome object.